The first thing Marcus Dre noticed about her was the blood. Not the wings, though the wings were impossible and enormous and folded against her back like twin sails of hammered copper. Not the eyes, though they were the color of deep water with no sun in it, that particular blue-black that has no name in any human language. Not the horns, small ones, barely nubs above her temples, almost hidden in hair the shade of old iron. Not any of the things that made her unmistakably, undeniably not human. The blood. It ran from a gash along her left forearm, dark and thin, nothing like the vivid red of a human wound. It dripped from her fingers and pattered onto the stone floor of the Cathara market in a slow, patient pattern, like a man counting seconds before he gives up waiting. She was fighting over food. That was the second thing Marcus noticed, and the one that kept him standing there when every reasonable instinct said to step back, look away, and let the alien politics of a world he'd been stationed on for exactly 11 days sort themselves out without his involvement. She had a bundle of grain wraps in her arms, flat, dense, yellowish things that the Catharan locals sold from low stone tables, the cheapest food in the market. She had them clutched to her chest with her uninjured arm, pressed against the tarnished armor she wore like something she'd inherited rather than earned. And the merchant, a Catharan male, thick-limbed, bluish, with the small flat eyes his species used for expressing contempt, had one hand wrapped around her wrist, the injured wrist, the one still leaking that thin dark blood, and he was squeezing. He was squeezing because she'd taken the grain wraps without payment. She was taking them without payment because Marcus had already inferred from 11 days of learning to read a culture by its smallest details. She had nothing to pay with. The merchant said something in Catharan that the translation implant in Marcus's ear rendered as thief and vermin, and a third word the implant flagged as untranslatable, the kind of word that doesn't translate because decent languages don't bother inventing it. The alien woman said nothing. She just held on to the grain wraps. Marcus was 34 years old. He had spent 12 of those years as a field medic with the 14th Human Expeditionary, which meant he had spent 12 years arriving places after things had gone wrong. He had a professional and somewhat uncomfortable relationship with the moment right before a situation becomes unrecoverable. He recognized it the way other people recognize the first note of a song they've heard too many times. He recognized it now. He walked over. The merchant looked up at him with the flat Catharan eyes that conveyed, currently, annoyance at the interruption. Marcus was not a large man by military standards, medium height, medium build, the kind of unremarkable that lets you move through a crowd without friction. But he had a way of occupying space that came from years of walking into rooms where someone was dying and being the one person who was not allowed to panic. "How much?" Marcus said, in Catharan. The implant gave him the words with the slight delay he still hadn't gotten used to. The merchant looked between Marcus and the woman and said a number. Marcus paid it. He paid more than it, actually, partly because he was still calibrating Catharan currency, and partly because the merchant's hand was still on her wrist, and Marcus wanted to give it somewhere else to be as quickly as possible. The extra coins accomplished that. The merchant let go, pocketed what he'd been given, and moved away with the specific posture of a man who has won while technically losing. The woman looked at Marcus. He had expected gratitude. He had expected surprise. What he got was neither of those things. What he got was suspicion, deep and old, the kind that doesn't come from one bad experience but from so many bad experiences that they've worn a groove in the way you see the world. She looked at him the way you look at a hand that's been pulled back too many times, not afraid of it, not fooled by it. "What do you want?" she said. The implant gave him her words in flat English, but something in her voice, some register under the words, was a language all its own, and what it said was, "I know what this costs. Tell me what I owe you for it." "Nothing," Marcus said. She didn't believe him. He could see it clearly, the slight tightening at the outer corners of those dark eyes, the way she adjusted the grain wraps in her arms like she was calculating the weight of them against the possibility that she'd have to drop them and run. She had been someone's debt before. She understood transactions. She did not understand people who didn't want something back. "Your arm," Marcus said instead, because it was the true and immediate thing, and because he'd learned long ago that sometimes the only way past a wall of distrust is to ignore it and talk about what actually matters. "That needs cleaning. The gash is deep." She looked at her arm, looked back at him. "I know," she said. "Do you have?" he started. "I know," she said again, and this time it had an edge on it, thin and sharp. Not anger, exactness. She knew the wound was bad. She had known before he'd pointed it out. She did not need a human to arrive and inform her of her own body's condition. That was what the edge said. He almost left. A more sensible man would have left. "I have a kit," Marcus said. "Back at the transit barracks, 10 minutes from here. I'm a medic." He hesitated, then added, "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not going to ask for anything. You can leave whenever you want. That's going to get infected if you don't clean it, and Catherine Street grit has 3 separate strains of." 10 minutes, she said. He stopped. "You said 10 minutes, she said. "Yes." "Show me." Her name was Very. She told him this the way she told him everything for the first 5 minutes of the walk back, in the smallest unit of words that could technically be considered a sentence, with the posture of someone prepared at any moment to turn around. She walked slightly behind him and slightly to his left, where she could see both his hands. He noticed this and kept his hands visible without making a performance of it. The wings folded against her back made her broader than the Catherine locals, and the market crowd parted around her with the reflexive, slightly hostile consideration that Marcus was starting to understand was the standard Catherine attitude toward anyone not Catherine. She carried it the way she carried the arm, with the knowledge of it, and without flinching, and without pretending it wasn't there. The transit barracks were what they sounded like, a block of functional human standard accommodation in the diplomatic quarter, temporary housing for the small, perpetually underfunded human mission to Cathara. 3 doctors, 1 medic, Marcus, a political officer, 2 translators, and a staff of 6 who rotated through duties with the resigned efficiency of people who had requested better postings and not gotten them. Marcus got Very through the side entrance without encountering anyone, which was luck, and without her bolting at the unfamiliar human-spec hallways, which he didn't know whether to attribute to courage or stubbornness or some third thing he didn't have a word for yet. He sat her on the examination table in the small medical bay. She sat on the edge of it rather than back against it, wings still folded, feet on the floor, like she was staying only as long as she chose to. "How did it happen?" Marcus said, opening the kit. "The merchant," she said. Marcus looked up. "Not today's merchant," she said. 3 days ago, a different one. He had a blade." Marcus kept his face neutral. This was something he was good at. "Did you fight back?" "I ran," she said. He cleaned the wound. It was deep, as he'd estimated, a long, diagonal gash from just below the elbow toward the wrist, already showing the early signs of Catherine-specific contamination, a slight green discoloration at the edges that meant the infection was already working. He had the right antidotes. He had them specifically because the mission briefing had noted that Veilith species travelers, which was what Very was, he'd guessed from the wings and confirmed from the pigmentation, had a moderate vulnerability to Catharan environmental bacteria, and a human medic who didn't carry the appropriate countermeasures wasn't much use to anyone. He cleaned the wound. He applied the antidote compound. He closed the gash with medical sealant and dressed it. She watched his hands the entire time. Not the wound. His hands. "You've done this before," she said. "A lot of times." For who? Whoever needed it, Marcus said. He tied off the dressing. Soldiers mostly, other species when we had them. Ketherans twice, though they weren't happy about it. He paused. One Valeth about 6 years ago, different planet. She'd been caught in a crossfire that wasn't her business. Very was quiet for a moment. What happened to her? She said. She recovered, Marcus said. She was back on her feet in 4 days. She was angry about the 4 days. Something happened at the corner of Very's mouth. Not quite a smile. The shape of a smile that had decided against being a smile, but left a trace of itself behind anyway. We don't heal slowly, she said. I know. I'll have you out of here in 3. 2, she said. Marcus looked at her. 1, if you keep the dressing dry and don't use the arm. The shape was back at the corner of her mouth. Acceptable. He began putting the kid away. He was aware of her watching him, and aware that the quality of the watching had changed. The suspicion was still there. It was still the dominant note, but something else was running underneath it now, something he didn't yet have a name for. Why, she said. He didn't pretend not to understand the question. Because it needed doing, he said. He capped the antidote compound. And because I could. That's not enough, Very said. Marcus looked at her. Why not? Because no one does anything for only that reason. There is always something else. Something wanted. Maybe for most people, Marcus said. He was choosing his words carefully, not because he was trying to manage her, but because it mattered to him that she understand. But I'm a medic. My job, the whole point of my job, is to fix the thing that's broken without asking what it was doing when it broke. I don't get to decide who deserves help. I just help. The silence stretched between them. The medical bay was small and very quiet, the way quiet happens in places built for emergency, the potential of noise held in reserve. I stole the food, Very said. I know. I don't have money. I know that too. Then why? Very, he said her name for the first time and she stopped. I paid for some grain wraps. It's fine. She looked at him with those water-deep eyes for a long moment. He had the feeling she was looking for the angle, the hidden architecture of the transaction, the place where the debt was concealed. She was very good at looking for it. She'd had a lot of practice. I'll repay you, she said at last. You don't. I'll repay you, she said again. Not a negotiation, a statement of intent. I don't carry debt. Marcus looked at her. He thought about arguing and didn't. However you like, he said. She came back the next day. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected to never see her again, or to spot her at some distance in the market, and have her look through him the way you look through someone you've decided to owe nothing to. Instead, she appeared at the side entrance of the transit barracks at the 6th hour of the Ketharan morning, earlier than Marcus had been awake, which meant she had been waiting, with a small object in her uninjured hand. It was a Valeth warding mark, a flat disc of worked copper, etched with a pattern Marcus didn't recognize, about the size of his palm. What is this? He said. A ward, she said, against infection, against misfortune on unfamiliar roads. She held it out. In my culture, a healing gift is repaid with a protection gift. This is the appropriate response. Marcus took it. It was heavier than it looked, warm from where she'd been holding it. Thank you, he said. She nodded once, with the brisk finality of a transaction concluded. She didn't leave. Marcus waited. The dressing, she said finally. You said to keep it dry. I couldn't sleep on the dressing side. It's fine, she added before he could speak. I'm not complaining. I just need to know how long before I can take it off. Let me look, Marcus said. He took her back to the medical bay. He examined the wound, which was healing with the speed she'd predicted. The Valeth cellular regeneration was genuinely impressive, the kind of thing that made a medic understand at a cellular level why some species had survived the things they'd survived. The infection was gone. The sealant was holding. Tomorrow, he said, morning. After that, keep it out of direct sunlight for a few days. We don't like direct sunlight, Very said, as if this were an obvious fact she was mildly surprised to need to explain. Right, then you're fine. He was putting away the diagnostic tool when she said, You know nothing about Valeth. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, delivered with a directness he was starting to understand was simply how she talked. I know some, Marcus said, not enough. What do you know? You're from the Valeth cluster 3 systems from here. Your species was primarily a nomadic trading species. The wings are for high-altitude navigation, not sustained flight. He paused. You don't like sunlight, you heal fast, you don't carry debt. A silence. Was, Very said. Marcus looked at her. You said was, she said. Primarily a nomadic trading species, was. He said nothing. We know what we were, Very said. She was looking at the wall behind him at something that wasn't there. We know very precisely what we were because we are not it anymore. She looked back at him. The Ketharan Trade Council closed our access to their stations 11 years ago. They said we were, the word they used translates as unverifiable. It means they could not make a profit from us that they couldn't also make from someone else at less inconvenience. And so you couldn't trade. We couldn't move, she said. We couldn't reach the next hub. We were here already, many of us, and we couldn't leave and couldn't trade and we just couldn't. She stopped. You asked how the wound happened. 3 days ago, a market merchant decided I was taking up space he could use for actual customers. The quiet in the medical bay was different now. I'm sorry, Marcus said. Very looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone hearing a phrase they've translated before, but never quite understood the use of. Why, she said. Because it shouldn't have happened, because it keeps happening, because someone should be sorry and no one is. She was very still. I've been on Kethara 11 days, Marcus said, and I've already seen. He stopped. He was not a man who spoke easily about the things he'd seen. The human mission here is supposed to be about trade negotiations, and it is mostly. But I've also been watching what the Trade Council does to anyone who isn't Ketharan and useful, and I think, he stopped again. What do you think? Very said softly. I think it isn't right, Marcus said, and I think I don't have any power to fix it from where I'm standing, but I can at least be someone who knows it's wrong. She looked at him for a long time. You are a very strange human, she said at last. I've been told. The shape was back at the corner of her mouth, more of it this time. She came back a 3rd day and a 4th. She didn't explain why. She didn't need to, and Marcus understood somehow that asking would be the wrong thing, that whatever was happening had its own pace, its own logic, and the worst thing he could do was name it too soon and make it into something fragile. They talked in the medical bay, mostly. Sometimes they walked in the diplomatic quarter, where the architecture was human-spec enough that Very attracted looks from Ketharans, but not the aggressive displacement she encountered in the market. Marcus noticed that she navigated space differently in the diplomatic quarter, not relaxed, not exactly, but less braced. He learned things. He learned that Valeth wings were not merely decorative. The copper color of hers indicated she was 3rd tier, by Valeth reckoning, a trader's rank, not a warrior's or an elder's. The 1st tiers were silver. The elders were white. He learned that the horns were not horns exactly but sensory organs, attuned to magnetic fields, which explained why she could navigate in the pitch black of Kethara's irregular nights with no apparent difficulty. He learned that the grain wraps she'd stolen were not for herself. She had 2 younger siblings somewhere in the lower market district, teenagers by Valeth reckoning, who she'd been keeping alive on whatever she could find since their trading vessel was impounded 18 months ago. He learned this last piece by accident. She mentioned it the way you mention things you've stopped thinking of as remarkable, because they are simply the ongoing texture of your days. He said nothing immediately. He said nothing because he was, at that moment, experiencing the particular kind of anger he got sometimes. Not hot, not loud, but very dense, settled behind his sternum like a stone, and he didn't want to put any of it onto her. "How old are they?" he said. She told him their ages in Valeth years, which the implant converted automatically. 14 and 16 in human equivalents. "Have they eaten today?" Marcus said. She looked at him. "Very." "I don't know," she said. I was going to go back." "Okay," Marcus said. He was already standing up. "Show me where." She tried to tell him it wasn't his problem. She tried this twice, with increasing intensity, as they walked through the market toward the lower district, which was the part of Cathara that the diplomatic orientation materials had described as economically underdeveloped, and which turned out to mean the place where everyone the Trade Council had no use for ended up. Marcus listened to both attempts and kept walking. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "Then why?" "Because I want to," he said. "Because I'm in a position to help and you're not right now, and that's the only relevant math." He glanced at her. "I'm not going to take the food back. I'm not going to expect anything. If it helps, pretend I'm doing it for professional reasons. Field medics have to maintain basic nutrition standards in the populations they serve." She looked at him. "Is that actually true?" she said. "It's in the regulations somewhere," Marcus said. "I'm sure." The shape was at the corner of her mouth again. He was starting to understand it. It wasn't a smile she'd forgotten how to make. It was a smile she'd taught herself to keep very small, because things that showed too clearly got used against you. He was starting to understand that about her, piece by piece. The size of everything she allowed herself was exactly calibrated to what she could afford to lose. The lower market was a cluster of temporary structures, the kind that accumulate where there is no official space and no one with enough power to clear them. The Valeth who lived there, 40 or 50 of them, Marcus estimated, though it was hard to count, occupied a specific cluster of 3 adjoined structures near the district's northern edge. They were distinguishable from a distance by the wings, copper and dim silver, and 1 or 2 that had gone to a grayish-green that Marcus guessed meant old age or illness. They looked at Marcus the way a group of people look at someone who has never come before, and whose arrival could mean very many different things. Very spoke to them briefly in Valeth, a flowing, slightly percussive language that the implant was not calibrated for, and rendered mostly as untranslatable, with occasional floating nouns. What Marcus could tell from body language alone was that she was vouching for him. Some of the wariness in the group adjusted, not gone, but re-aimed. Her siblings were Sarath and Len. Sarath was the 16-year-old, with the same iron-shaded hair as very but brighter eyes, copper orange, and the specific combination of hunger and guarded hope that Marcus had learned to recognize in adolescence in difficult situations across a dozen species and 4 planets. Len was 14, quieter, with wings that hadn't fully developed yet. They were copper at the roots and shading to gold at the tips, which Marcus guessed meant she was still growing into herself. Both of them looked at their sister, then at Marcus, then back at their sister. Sarath said something in Valeth that the implant rendered as untranslatable query. "This person." Very said something back that the implant rendered as untranslatable apparent meaning. "Something or nothing, wait and see." Marcus sat down on a low stone that someone had repurposed as a seat, and he unpacked the supplies he'd brought. He'd overpacked, and he knew it, but he'd overpacked strategically, things that kept well, things with a high caloric density, things that wouldn't go to waste even if some of it wasn't eaten. He laid them out. Sarath watched this process with an expression Marcus recognized as hunger held very tightly in check by pride. Len just looked at the food. You don't have to wait, Marcus said in Ketharan, hoping the implant would carry it into something approaching Valeth. This is for you. Sarath looked at Veri. Veri said something. Sarath looked back at Marcus with an expression that had moved about 20% of the way towards something other than suspicion, and then Len reached out and took a nutrient bar, and after that the calculation was over. Marcus stayed for about an hour. He talked to Sarath, who spoke some Ketharan and was better at hiding how much they understood than at hiding how much they wanted to. He learned, through careful listening and the occasional translated fragment from Veri, that the Valeth settlement had been in the lower market for 11 months. Before that, they'd been in a different district. Before that, they'd been in their vessels. He learned that the Trade Council had a process, a formal, documented, bureaucratically thorough process, for adjudicating the status of non-Ketharan residents. And he learned that the Valeth had submitted to this process 3 times in the last 2 years, and each time the outcome had been a temporary status extension that expired before the next filing period, leaving a gap during which they were technically illegal, during which the market merchants could do whatever they wanted, during which the blade-wielding merchant 3 days ago had simply been exercising a right the council had not quite explicitly granted, but had not seen fit to prevent. He walked back to the transit barracks alone. Veri stayed with her siblings. At the edge of the lower market she stopped him with a hand on his arm, the uninjured one, though the injured arm was healing so fast now that the distinction was becoming academic. "Tomorrow," she said. He looked at her. "What about tomorrow?" "I'll come tomorrow," she said, as if he'd asked, as if she wanted to be clear about it. "Okay," he said. She let go of his arm. She looked at him for a moment with those water-deep eyes, and he had the feeling again of someone looking for the angle, the hidden cost, and finding, for the first time, that the search kept coming up empty. "Okay," she said and went back. He started pulling the Trade Council files the next morning. He was a medic, not a diplomat, which meant he had no official standing to pull Trade Council files. He also had a political officer named Bren Sitaro, who was perpetually short-staffed, and had mentioned more than once that she could use someone with attention to detail for background research. Marcus went to her office and told her he'd found something that might be relevant to the human mission's interests, and Bren Sitaro looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been doing this long enough to understand when someone has a personal stake and when they have a point, and invited him to elaborate. He elaborated. Bren Sitaro was quiet for a moment. "The Valeth," she said. "Yes. They're not part of our negotiation." "Not yet," Marcus said. Bren looked at him. She had the kind of face that showed very little by choice, a skill Marcus recognized, and what was showing now was the particular thoughtfulness of someone running the numbers on something they hadn't previously considered worth running the numbers on. "The Trade Council's preferred partners for the next phase of talks are the Murath Combine," she said slowly, "which is convenient for the Council, because the Murath Combine operates out of 3 of the 6 stations that used to be Valeth access points." "Yes," Marcus said. "So the Valeth were shut out to make room for a preferred partner." "That's what the filing records look like when you read them in order," Marcus said. "I could be wrong, but the timeline fits." Bren was quiet for another moment. "And you want me to do what exactly?" she said. "I want you to know about it," Marcus said. "Because if we're negotiating trade access through this sector, and the Council's preferred partner got that position by displacing a population that was here first, then we're potentially signing onto something we might not want to be associated with." "That's a diplomatic consideration," Bren said. "I know it is. You're a medic." "I know that too." Bren looked at him for a long moment. "Do you have more files?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Bring them." Veri came every day, and every day there was a moment, sometimes early, sometimes late, where the suspicion shifted into something else, not trust yet, but the space where trust might eventually park itself. He told her what he was doing. He didn't have to. She hadn't asked him to intercede on the Veilith's behalf, and he understood that there was a version of this where she might not want him to, where a human medic involving himself in the trade council politics felt like one more thing to manage, one more potential debt accrued. He told her anyway, because he didn't want to be doing something on her behalf without her knowing. She was very still when he finished. "You could lose your posting," she said. "Possibly," Marcus agreed. Bren Sitaro's mission depends on council goodwill. If she pushes too hard on this. "She knows the risks," Marcus said. "She's better at this than I am. She knows exactly how hard to push." Very was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" she said, the same word, the one she kept coming back to. "Because it matters," Marcus said. "Because 40-something people are living in temporary structures in the lower market and eating whatever they can find, and the reason they're there is that someone decided they weren't profitable enough to matter. And I can't fix all of it. I'm not even sure Bren can fix most of it, but I can at least make sure the people with leverage know what they're leveraging." She was looking at him again with that searching expression, the one that looked for the hidden cost. "You really don't want anything," she said, slowly, like someone testing ice. "I want you to eat enough," Marcus said. "I want your siblings to be somewhere safe. I want the council to have one fewer way to pretend what they're doing is a neutral administrative procedure." He paused. "That's what I want." The silence settled. Very said, "We have a concept in Veilith. There's no exact translation. The closest is," she stopped, searching, "the wind that doesn't know it is wind, something that acts from its nature, not from calculation. That gives because giving is simply what it does without keeping account." "That sounds almost like an insult," Marcus said. "It's not," she said. "In Veilith culture, it's the highest thing you can say about someone." She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before, not the suspicion, not the wariness, not the careful containment of everything that could be taken. Something quieter and older than any of those. "I've been trying to find your angle for 3 weeks," she said. "There isn't one." "I told you," Marcus said. "You told me," she said. "I didn't believe you." A pause. "I believe you now." He didn't say anything. He had the sense that something had shifted, something large and slow, and that the wrong word would undo it. Very looked at her hands for a moment, the healed arm, the copper wing feathers resting against her back. "My people don't trust easily," she said. "We learn not to. 11 years is a long time to learn." She looked up. "But there's another thing we have, another concept, a response to the wind that doesn't know it's wind." She paused again. "The tree that grows toward the light," she said, "not because it chose to. Because the light was simply there, and the tree did what living things do in the presence of something real." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Is that what this is?" he said carefully. "I think so," Very said. "I think that's what this is." The Trade Council review took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of Bren Sitaro in rooms Marcus was not invited into, with files that Marcus had helped compile, making arguments that Marcus had no direct role in. 6 weeks of Very coming to the medical bay. 6 weeks of Marcus making the walk to the lower market with supplies 2 or 3 times a week, and Sereth gradually beginning to talk to him in Ketharin about things other than food and status and the filing backlog, and Len showing him, with enormous seriousness, a small device she'd been building from salvaged parts that tracked magnetic field variations, the same fields her underdeveloped horns were beginning to learn to read. 6 weeks of mornings when Very arrived and the suspicion was a little thinner, and evenings when she left and both of them knew, without saying it, that there was a reason she came back every day, and a reason Marcus was always there when she did. She told him about the Veilith cluster as it had been, once, a loose, fast-moving network of traders and navigators who built nothing permanent because permanence wasn't the point. The point was the movement, the exchange, the next horizon. She told him about her parents, who had been excellent traders and mediocre parents in the way of people whose best self lived in the work. She told him about learning to navigate by magnetic field at age 9, standing at the prow of their vessel with her arms out and her horn buds tingling, learning to read a language in the air that most species couldn't hear. He told her about Earth, which she'd heard of but never visited. About his mother, who had been a nurse, and had taught him that the way you know someone is worthy of trust is that they do the small things consistently, not the large things dramatically. About the war that had ended before he was old enough to fight in it, and the peace that had followed it, which was the complicated, imperfect, valuable kind of peace that required constant maintenance. About why he'd become a medic instead of a soldier, because soldiers went toward the fight, and what he'd always been drawn to was the thing after, the work of reassembling what the fight had broken. "You are a man who comes after," she said once thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" "You arrive when things have gone wrong, and you fix what you can." She looked at him. "I arrived when things had already gone wrong. Everything since then has been coming after." She paused. "Maybe that's why we understand each other." "Maybe," Marcus said. "Or maybe," she said, "you're simply the wind that doesn't know it's wind, and I'm simply a tree, and neither of us is as philosophical about it as we're pretending." Marcus looked at her. The copper light of the Ketharan afternoon was coming through the narrow window of the medical bay at the angle that hit her hair and made it look less like iron, and more like something precious that iron is trying to imitate. He had the thought, clearly and without particular drama, that she was the most interesting person he had met on any planet he'd been stationed on, and that he had no interest in being anywhere she wasn't. He didn't say this. He said, "I think we might be exactly as philosophical about it as we're pretending." The corner of her mouth, more of it than he'd ever seen, closer to an actual smile than it had ever been. "Possibly," she said. The Trade Council's decision came on a morning that was raining in the particular sideways, committed fashion of Ketharan wet season. Marcus heard about it from Bryn Citaro, who came to the medical bay with the expression of someone who has won a partial victory and is being careful not to claim it as a full one. The Valeth status had been reclassified, not full resident status. The council wouldn't go that far, not yet, but recognized temporary habitation rights, with access to market stalls on the same terms as any other temporary resident, with a formal appeals pathway that had actual teeth to it, and with a review scheduled in 1 year rather than the current rolling non-schedule that expired and renewed at the council's convenience. "It's not everything," Bryn said. "I know," Marcus said, "but it's a starting point. And the council knows we'll be watching the review." She looked at him. "You did good research for a medic." "I had good information," Marcus said. He told Very that afternoon. She was standing at the window of the medical bay, looking out at the rain, when he came back from Bryn's office. She'd been coming earlier recently and staying later, and neither of them had made a remark about it. He told her all of it. The reclassification, the market access, the review, the teeth in the appeals pathway. She was very still for a moment after he finished. "Recognized temporary habitation," she said. "It's not permanent," Marcus said, "but it's real," she said. "It has a word. Official words don't sound like much unless you've spent 11 years not having any." She turned from the window. Her eyes were doing something he hadn't seen before, not the water-deep stillness, but something active in them, some motion under the surface. "My people can trade again. They can open stalls. They can." She stopped. "They can start," Marcus said. She looked at him. "You did this," she said. "Bryn Citaro did this. I just found the files." "You found the files because you came to a market and saw someone bleeding," Very said. "And then you paid for grain wraps, and then you walked to the lower district." She looked at him steadily. "You followed every small thing to the next small thing. That's what you did." The small things were the right things to do, Marcus said. That's all. That's everything, she said. She crossed the space between them. She moved differently than she had that first day in the market, without the constant readiness to stop, without the body calculating the distance to the nearest exit. She crossed the space between them, and she put her healed arm, the one he'd cleaned and closed and dressed, along the side of his face, her hand warm and her wing feathers shifting with a small, barely audible sound like a sail in new wind. I have been trying for 3 weeks, she said quietly, to find a reason not to trust you. I know, Marcus said. I couldn't find one. I know that too. It's very inconvenient, she said. And the smile, the real one, the one that had been building in the corner of her mouth for weeks, arrived, and it turned out to be, like most things about her, larger and more complete than the careful hints of it had suggested. He laughed. It surprised him slightly. She looked surprised too, and then not surprised, and then she laughed as well, quietly, in the small rain-light medical bay on a planet neither of them was from. What happens next? Very said after a moment. Marcus thought about it honestly. My posting here is for another 4 months, he said. After that I go where they send me. I don't know where that is yet. And after that, she said. After that I could come back, he said. Or, he paused. The human mission is going to need more staff if the negotiations go the way Bren thinks they're going. There are medical positions. I could put in for one. Because of the negotiations, Very said. Partly, Marcus said. She was looking at him with those deep eyes, not searching for the angle anymore, just looking. We have one more concept, she said. The last one I'll translate for you today. What is it? There's a word in Valeth for the traveler who finds the place they didn't know they were going to, she said. The one who looked at 1,000 doors and kept passing them, and then found the one that opened inward and knew immediately that this was the one. She looked at him. I used to think it was a romantic concept, something from old stories. I used to think people only found that in the stories. Marcus was quiet. Did you change your mind? He said. I'm reconsidering, she said, based on new evidence. He thought about the day in the market, the blood on the stone floor, the merchant's hand on her wrist. He thought about the walk back to the barracks and the way she'd walked behind him and slightly to his left. He thought about the small shape at the corner of her mouth, weeks of it, building to this. Good data, he said. Very good data, she said. Outside, the rain shifted. The Ketharan wet season did this, sudden changes, the sky making up its mind. And through the narrow window of the medical bay, a stripe of late copper light fell across the floor between them and illuminated nothing in particular except the room they were standing in, and the slight drift of wing feathers, and the ordinary and entirely improbable fact of 2 people from different stars who had each, in their own way, been going somewhere else until they weren't. 3 days later, Sarath opened the first Valeth market stall in the recognized zone in 11 years. It sold navigation instruments and calibration tools for magnetic field readers, the kind of equipment the Valeth had always specialized in, the kind that, it turned out, there was a market for among the Ketharan shipping community that the Trade Council had simply never bothered to facilitate. Sarath ran it with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting to do something real for a very long time. Len assisted, mostly by demonstrating the magnetic readers with her developing horns, which attracted a steady and interested stream of customers who had never seen a young Valeth navigate by field alone. Very stood back and watched this with an expression that Marcus had not seen on her before, and that he thought might simply be called peace. Not the absence of everything hard, but the presence of something good enough to make the hard things bearable. You're not helping, he said, standing beside her. I'm supervising, she said. From 30 feet away. I'm a very hands-off supervisor. He stood with her and watched her siblings work the stall with growing confidence, watched the first Ketharan customer haggle over a calibration tool and then buy it, watched the look Sarath and Len exchanged when the first real coin of their own earning hit the counter. "Thank you," Very said. "Sarath did that," Marcus said. "And Len." "Because there was space for them to do it," she said, "which is not nothing." "No," Marcus agreed, "it's not nothing." She was quiet for a moment, watching her siblings. Then, "When you go the 4 months and then wherever they send you, you said you'd come back." "I said I'd put in for a position," Marcus said carefully. "I said I could come back." "Is there a difference?" "Not a very big one," he said. "I want to come back." Very turned and looked at him. Full on, the way she'd looked at him that first day in the medical bay, the way that had started as suspicion and become something else entirely. "I'll be here," she said. "We're recognized temporary habitation now. We're not going anywhere for at least a year." "Year minimum," Marcus said. "Year minimum," she said. The light was good this time of afternoon. The market around them was loud in the multilingual, multisensory way of trade markets everywhere. The sounds of things being exchanged, things being given and taken, the constant small negotiations that make up the ordinary texture of people with needs and people with things to offer, and the narrow, improbable, daily miracle of those two groups finding each other. From 30 feet away, Len said something in Valeth and Sarath laughed, and a Ketharan customer looked at them both with the expression of someone revising a previous assumption, and the afternoon moved forward in the direction afternoons generally go. Very's hand found Marcus's, unhurried, certain. He held it and said nothing and let the market do what markets do around them and thought, "Here. This is the thing. This is what it looks like when a small right thing, done without calculation, without needing anything back, follows itself forward into something neither person would have found alone. The wind that doesn't know it's wind. The tree growing toward the light." He thought that if he had to explain to anyone why humanity was worth the trouble of encountering, worth the risk, worth the adjustment, worth the long and uncomfortable work of learning to recognize something decent when it arrived at your wrist with a medical kit and a question, he would bring them here. To this market, this afternoon, this specific quality of copper light. He would show them this and say, that's the thing. That's what we're trying to be when we're at our best. Not the loudest, not the strongest, not the ones who show up with leverage and leave with profit. The ones who pay for grain wraps. The ones who stay. 4 months felt, in retrospect, like a very particular kind of time. Not short, not long, the kind that teaches you something without announcing that it's teaching you. Marcus had lived in 4-month increments most of his adult life, postings, deployments, rotations, and he had developed, out of necessity, the skill of extracting what was real from a temporary situation without pretending the situation wasn't temporary. You didn't carry things lightly by refusing to pick them up. You carried them by knowing exactly how heavy they were. He knew how heavy this was. The mornings Very came, the afternoons in the lower market, the evenings sometimes, sitting in the diplomatic quarters' small common area where the light came in at the angle that reminded Marcus, in a sideways and not unhappy way, of late afternoons in the town where his mother had lived. The evenings where they talked or didn't talk, and both options felt equally easy. He had never been someone for whom silence was easy with other people. It required either deep familiarity or deep comfort, and he had had both in his life but never simultaneously. With Very, silence was simply another form of language, a present, weighted, meaning something without needing to be decoded. He thought about this in the rare hours he spent alone. He thought about what it meant that a person from a different star system, with wings and horn buds and eyes the color of water before dawn, was the first person in his adult life with whom silence felt like a complete sentence. He didn't have an answer for it. He had a great deal of data and a working hypothesis. which was that the universe occasionally arranged things with more precision than it had any business doing. The political officer from the Trade Council came on the 40th day. Not a formal visit. That would have required Brensitaro's office to be involved, and the council knew better than to formally engage with the human mission on a matter they were still pretending was purely administrative. This was an informal visit, the kind that doesn't have an official record but carries an official message. The council representative's name was Hethan. She was a senior Ketharan female. The species aged into a distinctive deep blue, and Hethan was very blue with the polished, pleasant, unyielding manner of someone who had spent decades delivering messages that were not invitations to negotiate. She came to the transit barracks in the morning and she was shown to Brensitaro's office, but she asked specifically, through her assistant, to speak also with the human medic who has been active in the lower district. Brensitaro told Marcus about this in the hallway beforehand. "You don't have to go in," she said. "I want to," Marcus said. "She's going to try to suggest that your involvement in the lower district was inappropriate, that a medical officer shouldn't be engaged in, she'll have a word for it, something that sounds diplomatic." "Community health assessment," Marcus said. "That's what I'll call it." Bren looked at him with a faint expression that might have been approval. Hethan was pleasant. She was very pleasant. She sat in Brensitaro's small office with the composed pleasantness of someone who has never needed to raise her voice and has no intention of starting now, and she thanked them for the human mission's commitment to productive relations with Kethara, and she expressed the council's view that the recent attention to the Valeth temporary resident community had been, perhaps, somewhat in excess of what the community's situation warranted. "They had a 17-month filing backlog," Marcus said. Hethan looked at him with calm, flat eyes. "The administrative process has its own rhythm," she said. The administrative process was being used to create a gap during which they had no legal protection, Marcus said. 3 of them were physically assaulted during the last gap period. 1 had a blade used on her. Hethan said nothing. "I'm a medic," Marcus said. "I treated the wound, that's what I'm here for." Brensitaro, beside him, said nothing. She had, Marcus noted, deliberately said nothing since Hethan arrived, which meant she was letting Marcus speak and had decided this was useful. Hethan was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone running a calculation. "The Valeth community is not a trade partner of Kethara," she said finally. "They could be," Marcus said. "Sarath, one of the community's young people, opened a navigation tool stall 3 weeks ago. She's already had Ketharan buyers. There's a market gap for magnetic field calibration equipment that the Valeth specialize in." He paused. "The same equipment, the Murath Combine, imports from Offworld at a 40% markup." Hethan was very still. "That's an interesting observation," she said. "I thought so," Marcus said. Brensitaro said mildly, "The human mission would be interested in seeing Ketharan trade relationships that benefit multiple communities. We think that makes for more stable long-term partnerships." Hethan considered this. The calculation had clearly gotten more complex. "The Council's review of Valeth status," she said at last, "will proceed on schedule." "Good," Marcus said. Hethan left shortly after, with the pleasant composure of someone who had come to deliver a message and was leaving with a different message than she'd brought. Brensitaro waited until the sound of Hethan's footsteps was gone, and then she said, "You mentioned the Murath Combine." "Yes," Marcus said. "That was a significant move." "I know. It means we're signaling that we see the connection, that we're willing to make it visible." "Yes," Marcus said. Bren looked at him for a long moment. "You've been doing this for 6 weeks," she said. "You know that medics aren't supposed to." "I know what medics are supposed to do," Marcus said. "I've been doing it. I've been treating wounds, maintaining community health, documenting environmental health concerns in the lower district. He met her eyes. The rest was just paying attention. Paying attention, Bren said. It's a skill, Marcus said. You learn it when your job is to arrive, after things go wrong, and figure out what went wrong. Bren was quiet for another moment. Then, I'm going to need that skill in the next phase of negotiations. There are 3 other non-Ketharan communities whose status the Council has been managing the same way they managed the Valeth. I have files on all of them. She paused. I could use a second opinion on what I'm looking at. I'll look at the files, Marcus said. You're a medic, Bren said. With very good attention to detail, Marcus said, and nothing else scheduled this afternoon. He told Very about Hethan's visit that evening. They were sitting in the common area, which had a narrow window that looked out over the diplomatic quarters' main avenue. Not scenic exactly, but busy in a way that was its own kind of pleasant to watch. Very had brought food. She was doing this more often now, bringing things from the stall Sarath ran. The small surplus of what was earned that day, fruit things Marcus didn't have names for that were sweet in a way that had no human comparison, flat-seeded crackers that paired with them well. He had stopped trying to refuse these contributions several weeks ago. The logic was unassailable. She didn't carry debt, which meant she also didn't carry gifts received without return, which meant accepting what she brought was the only way to make the exchange feel even to her. He had decided that her accounting system was worth operating inside. He told her about Hethan, about the mention of the Murath Combine, about Bren's offer. Very was quiet for a moment after he finished. You mentioned us to her, she said. Sarath stalled the equipment. I mentioned that there was an existing market gap. The Murath Combine is overcharging for what you produce better and cheaper. He looked at her. That's not charity, that's a competitive fact. You turned us into a trade argument, she said slowly. I turned a trade argument into something that happens to also benefit you, Marcus said, which is slightly different. She considered this. The Council won't care about the Valeth, she said. But they care about the Murath Combine. The Council cares about the Murath Combine's relationship with the Council, Marcus said, which means they also care, at least a little, about anything that affects that relationship. And you think? I think Hethan is going back to the Council with new math, Marcus said. I think the math now includes the possibility that blocking the Valeth costs more than it saves if the human mission is paying attention to what it costs. He paused. It might not work. It might not work for a long time, but it shifts the calculation. Very was looking at him steadily. You thought of all of this, she said. I thought of some of it, Marcus said honestly. Bren thought of some of it. The files thought of some of it. The files. When you lay them all out in order, Marcus said, the story they tell is fairly obvious. Someone just had to bother reading them in order. She was quiet again. Outside, the avenue moved with its evening traffic, Ketharan citizens, a handful of Murath traders, the occasional wing shape of a Valeth that Marcus was beginning to recognize individually. You came here to negotiate trade agreements, Very said. The human mission did, yes. You personally came here because that's where they sent you. Yes. And instead you've been, she stopped. I don't have a word for it. Paying attention, Marcus said. She turned and looked at him with those deep, water-colored eyes. The evening light was on her face, the particular soft gold of Kethara's long dusk, the iron-gray hair, the copper wing feathers catching the last of the day. She was, he had concluded some weeks ago, not beautiful in any way he had a framework for. She was beautiful in a way that required a new framework, the kind of beauty that doesn't announce itself and doesn't need to. The wind that doesn't know it's wind, she said quietly. You keep saying that. Because you keep proving it. She reached across the space between them and picked up one of the flat-seeded crackers, broke it in half, offered him one half. It was such a small gesture, the kind that can only happen when two people have been in the same room enough times that the space between them has become a kind of shared territory. He took it. "I'm going to miss this," he said. It came out before he'd quite decided to say it. Very looked at him. "4 months," she said. 93 days from now," he said. "Then wherever they send me." She was quiet for a moment. "There is a concept in Veilith navigation," she said. "When you're charting a course between 2 points that have never been charted before, there's no existing path. You have to feel your way by the magnetic field, find the pull, follow it, correct as you go." She paused. "The word for it translates, roughly, as finding the way that does not exist yet." Marcus looked at her. 93 days, she said, "and then we find the way that doesn't exist yet." "That sounds like a reasonable plan," Marcus said. "It's not a plan," she said. "It's a direction." "Even better," Marcus said. Her hand was on the table between them. He put his on top of it, the same way she'd held his arm that first day in the market, certain, unhurried, the way you do a thing you've decided to do. Outside, Cathara's long dusk finished its work and the evening took over, full and dark and full of stars, every one of them someone's home.